Ellie Mackintosh hadn't realized how hard it would be to breathe in the auditorium that day. May in Georgia's like sittin in God's personal sauna, and Piedmont College's air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against all those proud bodies packed together like tobacco leaves drying in a barn. "You hanging in there, sugar?" James squeezed her hand, his palm rough as century-old barnwood against her sweaty fingers. Barely. She fanned herself with the graduation program, the fancy embossed paper gone limp in the humidity. The fabric of her new dress, the one she'd splurged on at that boutique in Athens, was sticking to the back of her thighs like a second skin. But Lord have mercy, she wasn't about to miss a second of this. Tyler's graduation. Her baby boy. 4 years of college done and paid for despite her parents' best efforts. And wasn't that just the thorniest rose in her garden? 2 rows ahead, Ellie could see the stiff backs of her parents. Martha and Douglas Harrington sat ramrod straight. Her mama's hat perched on her head like some exotic bird had taken up residence and refused to budge. They hadn't spoken directly to Ellie or James since Christmas 3 years ago. The incident. But they'd come for Tyler. Of course they had. "They're planning something," Ellie whispered, narrowing her eyes at the back of her daddy's salt and pepper head. "I can feel it in my teeth." James snorted. "Your teeth got ESP now?" "Laugh all you want, but my dental intuitions never steered me wrong before." The ceremony dragged on slower than molasses in January, with some college president droning about bright futures and the changing landscape of opportunity. Ellie barely heard him. Her mind kept skittering back to that Christmas, to the bomb her parents had dropped at the dinner table between the ham and her mama's famous peach cobbler. "We've been thinking," Douglas had announced, swirling his sweet tea like it was fine cognac, "about Tyler's college fund." Even now, the memory made Ellie's stomach clench tighter than a new jar lid. She'd known right then, known it deep in that hollow place behind her ribs, that something bad was coming. The way her mama wouldn't meet her eyes. The way her daddy's voice had that false, generous tone he used when he thought he was being particularly magnanimous. James must have sensed her spiraling thoughts because he leaned over, his breath warm against her ear. "Hey now, remember where we are. This is Tyler's day. We won." He was right, of course. Ellie inhaled deeply through her nose and tried to center herself the way her therapist had taught her. Focus on the present. The smell of perfume and aftershave and excitement. The rustle of graduation gowns. The occasional whoop from an over-enthusiastic family when their graduate crossed the stage. And then, Tyler James Mackintosh, her boy. Her brilliant, stubborn, kind-hearted boy strode across that stage like he owned it. 6'2" and lanky as a pine sapling with his daddy's shoulders and her unruly hair. When he shook the dean's hand and accepted his diploma, Ellie felt something crack open inside her chest, spilling sunlight through all her dark places. James was on his feet beside her, clapping and whistling. She stood too, tears streaming down her face without permission. Even her parents had risen, though their applause was more restrained. Polite golf claps that wouldn't disturb the neighbors. "That's our son," she said to nobody in particular, the words catching in her throat. "Our son who made it despite everything they tried to do." Because 3 years ago, her parents had tried to take it all away. "His college fund is going to your nephew," they'd announced. Little Douglas needs it more. Little Douglas. Her sister Rachel's boy, who'd never worked a day in his life. Who'd had everything handed to him on a silver platter because Rachel had married a Savannah lawyer with old money and older connections. Tyler had been sitting right there at the table when they said it. 17 years old. Early acceptance letter to Piedmont already framed in his bedroom. He'd gone white as a flour sack, those big hazel eyes, James's eyes, blinking rapidly behind his glasses. But, that's my money," he'd stammered. "You always said it was for my education." Martha had patted his hand like he was still 5 years old. "Now, honey, your cousin's daddy lost his position at the firm, and they're going through a rough patch. Family helps family. Family helps family. As if Tyler wasn't family. As if the college fund they'd set up when he was born, the one they'd made such a show of contributing to every birthday and Christmas, was just a suggestion, not a promise. But James, oh, her sweet, steady James with his poker face and quiet ways, he'd just chuckled. A soft, knowing sound that had made Douglas's eyebrows shoot up toward his receding hairline. "Too late," James had said, taking a casual sip of his tea. "We transferred it last month." The silence that followed had stretched tighter than a fence wire. Ellie could still recall the exact shade of purple her daddy's face had turned, like a bruised plum left too long in the sun. "You what?" Martha had finally managed, her voice climbing an octave. "Transferred the funds," James had repeated, setting down his glass with a deliberate clink, "to an account in Tyler's name at a different bank." He'd smiled then, all teeth. "I've been meaning to thank y'all for your generosity over the years. Those quarterly statements you kept sending, real helpful for keeping track. And oh, the way they'd screamed when they realized. How the magnitude of what they'd lost, what they'd tried to steal, crashed down on them like a Georgia thunderstorm. How they'd threatened lawyers and lawsuits and family disgrace. But the money was gone, safely locked away where their grabby hands couldn't reach it. And the look on Tyler's face, that dawning realization that his parents had his back, that they'd seen the betrayal coming and headed it off, worth every penny of what they'd scraped together to replace what her parents had contributed, worth every extra shift James had picked up at the plant, worth every wedding ring and necklace Ellie had sold from her grandmother's jewelry box. Now, watching Tyler return to his seat among his fellow graduates, Ellie felt a fierce pride that burned away the last of her melancholy. Let her parents sit there with their tight smiles and their disappointment. Let them wonder what might have been if they'd chosen loyalty over favoritism. "Earth to Ellie," James murmured, nudging her ribs gently. "You disappeared on me for a minute there. Just thinking about how beautiful karma can be when she puts her mind to it." Ellie whispered back. The rest of the ceremony blurred by in a haze of emotion. Before she knew it, they were filing out into the May sunshine, the graduates tossing their caps while parents searched the crowd for familiar faces. And there he was, her Tyler, grinning wider than the Mississippi as he pushed through the crowd toward them. "Mom! Dad!" He grabbed them both in a bear hug that lifted Ellie clean off her sensible heels. "I did it." "You sure did, son." James's voice was thick with emotion, his eyes suspiciously bright behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Never doubted you for a second." Out of the corner of her eye, Ellie spotted her parents hovering at the edge of their little celebration, uncertain whether to approach. Part of her, the petty part she wasn't particularly proud of, hoped they wouldn't. But Tyler, bless his heart, had never been one to hold a grudge. He'd inherited James's evenness rather than her tendency to nurse slights like delicate houseplants. When he spotted his grandparents, he waved them over. "Granddad! Grandma! You made it!" Martha stepped forward first, arms outstretched for a hug that Tyler gave freely. "Of course we did, sweetheart. We wouldn't miss our only grandson's graduation." Ellie felt her eye twitch at that. Their only grandson until little Douglas had come along. Then Tyler had been demoted faster than a bad quarterback. Douglas cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable in his church suit. "Congratulations, Tyler. Your grandmother and I are very proud." He glanced at Ellie and James, a flicker of something, regret, defiance, crossing his weathered face. "We have something for you." Of course they did. Couldn't let the occasion pass without some grand gesture that would make them look generous after everything. Ellie tensed, readying herself for whatever it might be. A token check? A symbolic gift that cost more in presentation than substance? But it was Tyler's day, and she'd bite her tongue bloody before she'd ruin it. She forced her face into what she hoped was a neutral expression, though it probably looked more like she was passing a kidney stone. Douglas reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Not a card-sized one, but a business envelope, thick with something inside. "We want you to have this," he said, handing it to Tyler. "For your future." Tyler accepted it with a puzzled smile. "Thank you." "Open it, honey," Martha urged, practically vibrating with eagerness to be seen doing something nice. That woman could turn a charitable act into a Broadway production faster than you could say, "Bless your heart." Ellie exchanged a wary glance with James as Tyler carefully tore open the envelope. Inside was paperwork? Legal documents from the look of them, with a post-it note on top in her daddy's precise handwriting. Tyler's eyes widened as he scanned the note, then flipped through the papers. "This is... Granddad? Is this for real?" "What is it, son?" James asked, moving closer. "It's..." Tyler looked up, genuine shock on his face. "It's the deed to Great-Grandpa's fishing cabin, on Lake Oconee. They're giving it to me." And wasn't that just like trying to catch a greased pig? When you think you've got a handle on people, They go and do something completely unexpected. The cabin. The one place Ellie had always found peace as a child, fishing off the dock with her grandfather, listening to his stories about World War and the Depression. It was the one piece of family property Ellie had truly coveted, with its creaky floorboards and screened porch, and the way the morning mist rose off the lake like spirits dancing. She'd always assumed it would go to Rachel, perfect Rachel, with her perfect husband and perfect son. The golden child who never disappointed. Yet here was her daddy, giving it to Tyler. "We figured," Douglas said, his voice gruffer than usual, "that a young man starting out could use a place of his own. It needs some work, but the bones are good. Your great-grandfather built it to last." For once in her life, Ellie found herself completely speechless. James stepped in smoothly, offering his hand to Douglas. "That's mighty generous of you," he said, and Ellie could hear the genuine surprise in his voice. "Tyler loves that cabin." "I do," Tyler agreed, still looking stunned. "I was just telling Leah about it last week. How I wished I could take her there sometime." Leah. Tyler's girlfriend of 8 months. The one he'd met in his environmental science class. The one Ellie suspected might become more than a girlfriend sooner rather than later, judging by the way her son's eyes went soft whenever he mentioned her name. Martha beamed, clearly delighted by the impact of their gift. "Well, now you can, and your mother can show you all the little tricks to keeping the place up. That back door always did stick something awful in the summer humidity." It was an olive branch. Clumsy and unexpected, but an olive branch nonetheless. Ellie could recognize it for what it was, even through her shock. "The property taxes," she started, practical concerns immediately bubbling up. "All taken care of for the next 5 years, Douglas interrupted. "It's part of the gift." Tyler was examining the paperwork more closely now, his expression thoughtful. "There's no mortgage? No liens?" "Free and clear," Douglas confirmed. "It's yours, son. Do with it what you will." And there it was, the subtle dig. The implication that Tyler might sell it, might not value the family history. Ellie felt a flash of the old anger, but before she could say anything, Tyler smiled. "I was thinking maybe I could fix it up. Make it a little more modern without losing the character." He glanced at Ellie. "Mom could help design it. She always said she wished the kitchen had better light." Just like that, her clever boy had maneuvered around the potential landmine and turned it into something positive, something that included her. James caught her eye, his expression saying more than words ever could. "Let it be, Ellie. Let the past stay buried." His steady presence beside her was like an anchor in choppy waters. "I'd like that," she managed, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "That kitchen's been crying for a renovation since I was in pigtails." The moment stretched between them, fragile as a soap bubble, 4 adults who'd hurt each other standing awkwardly in the May sunshine, while around them other families laughed and took photos and made dinner reservations. It was Tyler who broke the tension, glancing at his watch with an expression of mild panic. "Oh shoot, I was supposed to meet Leah's parents 10 minutes ago. They came all the way from Columbus for this." "Well, go on then," Ellie shooed him. "Don't keep them waiting on account of us old folks jawing." "We're having dinner at Caroline's at 6, James reminded him. "We made reservations for 6, but let us know if you want to bring Leah and her parents along." Tyler's face lit up. "Really? That'd be awesome, Dad. Let me check with them." He turned to his grandparents, hesitating. "Would you all want to join too? If there's room?" Martha looked to Douglas, who looked to Ellie. The ball in her court, just like that. 3 years of stony silence and cold shoulders. 3 years of steering clear of their usual haunts in town to avoid awkward encounters. 3 years of Tyler caught in the middle, maintaining separate relationships with his parents and grandparents. And yet, "More the merrier," Ellie heard herself say, the words coming out strained but sincere. "James can call and change the reservation." The relief on Tyler's face was worth the discomfort she knew the evening would bring. He hugged her quickly, then his father, then dashed off through the crowd with his graduation gown billowing behind him like a superhero cape. Left in his wake, the 4 of them stood in a silence that hummed with unspoken words. "That boy," Martha finally said, shaking her head fondly. "Always running late since he could walk." "Gets that from James's side," Ellie replied automatically, then froze, realizing she'd fallen into the old pattern of easy family conversation. But James just chuckled. "Guilty as charged. Never did see the point in hurrying just to wait somewhere else." And then, like a rusty gate finally giving way, they were talking. Awkwardly at first, with careful pauses and overly polite phrasings. Douglas commenting on the ceremony length, Martha asking after James's mother's hip replacement. By the time they'd migrated to the parking lot, the conversation had found a rhythm that, while not completely natural, was at least not painful. Ellie even found herself laughing at one of her daddy's dry observations about the commencement speaker's toupee that looked like a startled muskrat taking a nap. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. The hurt ran too deep for that. But it was something. A willingness to see what might grow in the scorched earth between them. "We should get going if we're going to change and make it to dinner," James said, checking the time. "Especially if we're adding to the reservation." "Yes, of course." Martha smoothed her already immaculate skirt. "We'll see you there at 6. They confirmed the details, and Ellie watched her parents walk away toward their Lincoln, her daddy's hand resting lightly on her mama's back the way it had for 47 years of marriage. "You okay?" James asked quietly once they were alone beside their SUV. Ellie considered the question, really considered it. "I don't rightly know," she admitted. "I wasn't expecting any of this." "The cabin was a surprise," he agreed, unlocking the car. "Think they're trying to make amends?" "Maybe." Ellie slid into the passenger seat, immediately cranking up the AC against the Georgia heat. Or maybe they just want access to their grandson and figured this was the price of admission. James started the engine. Cynical. "Realistic," she countered, then sighed. "I don't know, James. Part of me wants to believe they've had some grand epiphany about family and forgiveness, but another part keeps hearing my daddy say his college fund's going to your nephew, and seeing Tyler's face just crumple." "I remember," James said quietly. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white momentarily before relaxing. "But I also remember telling my own daddy I'd never speak to him again after he missed our wedding for a fishing trip, and how much I regretted that stubbornness after he passed." Ellie reached over and placed her hand on his thigh, a silent acknowledgement of the pain he still carried. James's father had died of a heart attack just 2 years after their wedding, the reconciliation between them still new and fragile. "You think I'm being stubborn?" she asked, not defensively but genuinely curious about his perspective. "I think," he said carefully, navigating through the congested campus roads, "that holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." "That was some mighty fine acting on your part," she said, smiling at the memory. "Considering we didn't actually transfer anything until 3 days later." James winked at her, a slow, deliberate gesture that still had the power to make her knees wobble like a newborn colt's. "What can I say? I've got hidden depths too." And that, right there, was why she'd fallen in love with this man all those years ago. His quiet strength, his ability to see 3 steps ahead in any situation, the way he'd stood up for their son without raising his voice or throwing a single punch, the way they'd sat at their kitchen table afterwards, counting out their savings and making hard choices about what they could sell and what extra work they could take on. Working as a team, the way they always had. Ellie followed him into the house, already mentally sorting through her closet for something appropriate for an impromptu family dinner. Maybe that blue dress James liked, the one that brought out her eyes. New beginnings were always unpredictable, messy and complicated and full of potential pitfalls, like trying to tame a wild honeybee without getting stung. But sometimes, just sometimes, they led to something sweet. And for Tyler, for the future he was building with Leah, for the grandchildren who might someday run barefoot across the cabin's wooden floors, Ellie was willing to try.